I'm Craig Nash, Senior Editor at Good Faith Media.
And I'm Hayoung Park, a social work and theology student.
We are co-hosts of the Good Faith Bible Studies podcast, where we explore and discuss the weekly biblical text and lessons found in Good Faith magazine.
We'll also share ideas for leading group discussions on each week's text and lesson.
Let's dive in. Today's passage comes from Luke chapter 24, verses 13 through 35. Now, on the same day, two of them were going to a village called Emmaus, about 7 miles from Jerusalem, and talking with each other about all these things that had happened. While they were talking and discussing, Jesus himself came near and went with them. But their eyes were kept from recognizing him, and he said to them, "What are you discussing with each other while you walk along?" They stood still, looking sad. Then one of them, whose name was Cleopas, answered him, "Are you the only stranger in Jerusalem who does not know the things that have taken place here in these days?" He asked them, "What things?" They replied, "The things about Jesus of Nazareth, who was a prophet, mighty in deed and word before God and all the people, and how our chief priests and leaders handed him over to be condemned to death and crucified him. But we had hoped that he was the one to redeem Israel. Yes, besides all this, it is now the third day since these things took place. Moreover, some women of our group astounded us. They were at the tomb early this morning, and when they did not find his body there, they came back and told us that they had indeed seen a vision of angels who said that he was alive. Some of those who were with us went to the tomb and found it just as the women had said, but they did not see him. Then he said to them, 'Oh, how foolish you are, and how slow of heart to believe, and all the prophecies have declared. Was it not necessary that the Messiah should suffer these things and then enter into his glory?' Then, beginning with Moses and all the prophets, he interpreted to them the things about himself in all the scriptures. As they came near the village to which they were going, he walked ahead as if he were going on. But they urged him strongly, saying, 'Stay with us, because it is almost evening, and the day is now nearly over.' So he went in to stay with them. When he was at the table with them, he took bread, blessed and broke it, and gave it to them. Then their eyes were opened, and they recognized him, and he vanished from their sight. They said to each other, 'Were not our hearts burning within us while he was talking to us on the road, while he was opening the scriptures to us?' That same hour they got up and returned to Jerusalem, and they found the 11 and their companions gathered together. They were saying, 'The Lord has risen indeed, and he has appeared to Simon.' Then they told what had happened on the road and how he had been made known to them in the breaking of bread." So, wonderful passage. What are your initial thoughts on this?
Yeah, I think this might be one of my favorite passages in the Gospels. There's just so many elements of the story.
We talked earlier about how it's one of those stories that you think you know it all, and then you read again and you notice a little something you missed.
Yeah, I didn't realize it said in verse 35, Jesus was made known to them in the breaking of the bread, which I think is also my favorite part of the story that really sits with me this particular time I've been reading it, is like the tell of Jesus. Mm-hmm. We've been talking about that in prior episodes. The tell of Jesus is his ability to break bread and share it with other people. Yeah. Which I'm goals. I hope other people identify me by how I break bread.
Yeah. That's Hayoung.
Yeah,
I didn't
exactly.
know until she fed me.
The way that she ripped some sourdough is so iconic.
There's also this idea of, I think sometimes I miss when I read these passages of smell. And you know how smell unlocks memories and stuff. And they had just, 4 days before had, what they thought was the Last Supper.
Right.
Although we don't know if these disciples were a part of that group, but still there's that.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think it just says so much about the character of Jesus, that he is so closely associated with hospitality. And then also this tension of they're the ones hosting Jesus. They're come on over, you have to have dinner with us. And then he's the one breaking the bread, which is kind of a fun interplay.
That's interesting in light of next week's passage, Psalm 23.
Yes. We'll stay tuned.
Carry something with that. I'm interested in this idea. As you were talking, I had the idea that this is an M. Night Shyamalan type story.
Oh my goodness. Yes.
If, for listeners unfamiliar, M. Night Shyamalan is the director and screenwriter of The Sixth Sense and Signs and all sorts of movies like that, where there's a twist at the end that's always it's weird. I'm only now connecting this too.
Yeah, that's
Because
interesting.
his movies are all, there's a twist at the end, but it's always something that's been in front of you the whole time.
Right.
That I'm sorry if you haven't seen The Sixth Sense. It's 25, 30 years old, so I'm
Yeah.
about to spoil it
Spoiler
for you.
alert.
But the whole I see dead people thing is that the characters were actually dead the whole time.
Right.
And this is in some ways the flip side of that. You think about,
That's
yeah,
true.
yeah,
Yeah, someone needs to write something about that.
yeah,
But yeah, it's like
maybe that's what it
where
is.
our heart's not burning within us. It's like
Yeah.
the whole time something's up, you're missing something, and at the end of the movie, it's like, oh,
Yeah.
that's what it was.
And then there's also that little piece of the movie. M. Night doesn't do this, but other people do. They'll take little scenes from the movie that they'll then kind of put in a montage
Yeah.
that is reflective of the person who's now seeing
Mm,
of all the things that they might have missed,
right.
at a time. So one of the things I noticed first about this is this kind of plot point. They were kept from seeing him. One of the translations says their eyes were kept from seeing him. And we talked about this earlier. This idea of passive language is kind of a controversial, tool of writers, but
Oh yeah.
so passive language, an active way of saying that would be something kept them from seeing, like naming that thing. But Luke uses passive language here, which invites the readers to speculate and to wonder what kept them from seeing it. Did Jesus do something with his body, something magical that that kept his identity from them? Was it just the fact that maybe they were walking beside him and they didn't actually look at him, and maybe it was their lack of attention that kept them?
Right.
And it's really an invitation for us to just ask, what are the things that keep us from seeing Jesus?
Yeah.
And then there's so many pieces to this. I could say one of the things, I'm stuck on the idea that for this story and for these disciples, the location of this story is important. They are moving away from Jerusalem.
Oh yeah.
And there's this idea, a couple of ideas. One is that God is often found outside of where we expect to find God. And also there's this kind of, was Luke making a commentary here about the gospel expanding
Right.
beyond? And then lastly, and we talked about this, I believe, in a previous podcast, we're going to get to this a little bit in the lesson. There are 3 characters in this story. 2 of them are named, Jesus, Cleopas, and the other one is just an unnamed disciple. And there's this idea that's really beautiful of, is Luke creating this kind of narrative device and the reader is the unnamed disciple?
Mm-hmm.
And Luke is inviting us to read ourselves into that.
The self-insert.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We will be back in a moment to talk about the lesson. This week's curriculum in the Good Faith Bible Studies was written by Sean Palmer. Sean is the CEO of Sean Palmer Coaching. He's a homiletician in residence at Bammel Church in Houston and co-host of the Sacred Frames movie podcast. Sean has also been writing a lot for Good Faith Media about film, which is interesting in light of our previous conversation.
Yes, fitting. Yeah, I thought this study, first of all, it's just a really helpful, comprehensive walkthrough of the passage. And one thing that really resonated with me is about halfway through, John makes this observation that these walkers, Cleopas and the unnamed person, they're both believing and doubting, which I think unpacks 2 things that are compelling to me about this passage. One, that they're walkers, they're on this journey. Which, and when I was taking my Gospels class in seminary, we talked about how the entire book of Luke is this big journey. And whenever you see like it mentioned place, it's getting closer and closer to Jerusalem, which then climaxes at the crucifixion. And then now we have in the like denouement of that, like after the climax of the story, they're still on a journey, and they're on a journey outside of Jerusalem, which of course they go back. But I think that storytelling device, this imagery of constantly being on the move, is resonant to so many people in the Christian tradition, but also like really communicates how following Jesus is often accompanied by just constant change and contingency, and accepting that like you might not know where you're laying your head that night, or just
I know who your companion is that's walking beside you.
Truly, like you're among strangers all the time, which I think is reflective of the world of the readers or the writers of the story. But all that to say, I think that is an important theme for us to embrace as people of faith too. And then that accompanies the second point in the phrase that I pulled out. These walkers are both believing and doubting. And this tension of like, they know some things about Jesus, and they obviously know him intimately enough to recognize him breaking bread, but they're also really unsure, and they had this huge hope and experienced such deep disappointment, which is causing them to reevaluate everything they thought they knew. And I know that feeling well, and I think it's just a natural part of the life of faith.
Yeah, it's interesting, this whole believing and doubting at the same time, because I don't have the passage in front of me. I have my other notes in front of me, but I don't remember at the end them ever actually saying, "Oh, we get it completely." They
Yeah.
just say, "Weren't our hearts burning within us?"
Mm.
So that leaves space for, hey, this is a dynamic situation going on.
Mm.
Another one of these pieces that of the story that, I just never really think of, but it makes sense, is this idea that maybe one of the reasons that particular disciples didn't recognize Jesus is because maybe they'd never seen him before, or maybe they'd never seen him up close.
Yeah.
We know that there was a small group of disciples around Jesus. We know there was a little bit bigger group of the people who traveled, the women, the folks who took care of the money, all of that. But then when we talk about disciples, we're not just talking about that small group. We're talking about a small but not insignificant movement of people in Jerusalem and Galilee around
Hmm.
the time that Jesus. I also just had this thought of, did Cleopas and this unknown disciple, we don't know what their relationship is either.
Mm.
They could just be people who found each other
Yeah.
along the way.
Right.
They could be husband and wife. They could be friends. They could be
Right.
brothers. Again, it kind of invites us into
Yeah.
the story to read it dynamically.
Yeah. I also definitely just assumed they were both men. And now I'm like, oh, that other
Yeah,
disciple could have been a woman. And
you're such a misogynist.
yeah, yeah. My goodness.
And then I love this piece that Sean pointed out of Jesus's kind of his tendency to ask a lot of questions.
Hmm.
And there, somewhere along the way, I read something where they counted all these questions that Jesus asked, and something like, I think Sean said, hundreds of
I think
questions,
300 is what
300
yeah.
that we have record of Jesus asking. Only like two or three of them are questions that are like closed questions,
Mm.
like
Mm.
yes or no, this or that. Almost all the questions Jesus asks invites the responder, for lack of a better word, riff a little bit
Hmm.
to think through things. And I love this. And he pointed this out. Sean didn't point this out, but in his writing, I thought, by asking what things, Jesus was inviting them in a way to do this Pauline idea of working out your salvation and
Right.
fear and trembling.
Yeah.
Like he's inviting them, hey, talk through this a little bit.
Right.
I bet you'll get this if you just talk through it a little bit.
Yeah. I also, from a social worker perspective, I'm like, talking through things like that is a really helpful way of grieving and like processing
Oh,
trauma.
yes.
And so maybe there's that like emotional aspect of that too. It's like,
Yeah.
tell me what happened to you.
Yeah. They needed him to ask that,
Right.
to give them permission to kind of process what they were thinking,
Right.
because they were already processing it among themselves. But sometimes you need a stranger,
Hmm.
quote unquote stranger,
Yeah.
to
To
help
bring
you
it
through
out
it.
of you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, we'll be back in a moment to talk through how your small group can discuss this lesson.
Before we discuss some ideas for leading a group through this week's text and lesson, we want you to know that we have created a leader's guide to help you prepare.
The Leader's Guide contains an overview of the lesson, some highlights to focus on, and several discussion questions for your group to go through.
For those questions, you can focus on one or all of them or any combination. Also, feel free to adapt them for your particular group's needs.
The Leader's Guide can be found at goodfaithmedia.org. So there are any number of ways that your small group can approach this text. One of the things I'd love to just share, I just found out about this very recently. I was visiting with a good acquaintance of mine, and she works with students, and she does this practice with students in small groups. It's called Narrative 4. It was created, she told me about this. It was created by Colin McCann, who's a British writer who I love. He's written books about, he's a fiction writer. He's written Let the Great World Spin, which is an incredible book. He wrote a book that I read last summer, and I already forget the name of it, but it's about I'm getting a little bit off on a tangent
Yeah.
here, but it's about all the cables, which I didn't know existed that there are actual internet cables
Oh,
that go underneath the ocean.
oh yeah.
And he writes the story about the ships that go out to repair those when they're broken. Brilliant mind.
Huh.
Which makes sense that he would create something like this. It's called Narrative 4, and what you do is you facilitate with a group of people, small group, 6 to 8, need to be an even number ideally, and the leader gives the group a prompt, and it could be any number of things. The prompt could be your first communion, your first love, a time when you were surprised, a time when you were in pain, something like that. Then people go off in groups of 2 and they share their stories with each other. They have, I think, 10 or 15 minutes apiece to share their stories. And then the groups of 2 come back to the large group. And the thing is, each person in a group of 2 will share the other person's story. But here's the catch. They tell the story in the first person. So it's not like they're telling their story. This has happened to them. They're putting themselves in that place. And when I first heard that, I thought, oh, that's kind of a cool little, device to make sure that they're listening.
Yeah.
I thought it was like, what things can you catch and what things that you don't catch? But it's really deeper than that. And it's basically an empathy experience.
Right.
I took that as I was preparing for this, I thought, what a perfect opportunity for a small group to do. Modify that a bit and maybe have someone tell this story from the unnamed disciples' perspective, someone tell it from Jesus's perspective, someone from Cleopas' perspective, and just see kind of what happens.
Yeah, we had to do something similar to that for my Old Testament class in seminary. It was really good. Like, I think I did mine on Tamar, and it was
yeah.
And yeah, I think it's just a powerful tool for empathy. And like you even said at the beginning when we were talking about the passage itself, like the unnamed character kind of compels us to insert ourselves into the narrative. So I love that this is an activity that facilitates that. One thought for facilitating small group for this, in like children's Sunday schools and kids Sunday school type things, there's a lot of embodied practices. We, like, children like mirror the things that are happening in the story. If there's a fisherman in the story, they're gonna bring out the fishing nets and things. So maybe you can go on a walk too and go on a little journey as a group and just embody what the characters are doing. And just
it'd be interesting to read the passage as you're going.
Yeah.
Fascinating. And also, if you walk by your children's Sunday school class, you're going to make them jealous. And I want them to, assuming you're doing this in a Sunday school class. So
yeah.
Well, that's excellent. Well, we will be back next week for the next episode of Good Faith Bible Studies.
I'm Hayoung Park.
And I'm Craig Nash.
And you've been listening to the Good Faith Bible Studies podcast from Good Faith Media.
Our music comes from Pond 5.
Each weekly lesson can be found in Good Faith magazine.
You can also sign up to receive a free digital leader's guide.
Learn about how to receive both these resources at goodfaithmedia.org.
There you can find daily news and opinion, various podcasts from our Good Faith Media team and partners, and information about the initiatives that help guide our work.
So visit us at goodfaithmedia.org, and we'll be back next week with another installment of the Good Faith Bible Studies podcast.